Look past the surface, past the superficial, past the promotion, first job, and diploma. Then focus, refocus, and realize that woven in the tapestry of all we're made of, there's something remarkable. And when those details that make you, you are discovered, you find what matters most. Whatever your journey to financial success looks like, Union Bank recognizes what makes you exceptional. Union Bank, your details matter.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us at Housing California's first ever virtual unconference. The theme is designed to meet this moment, our homes, our voice, our California. Own the past, transform the future. My name is Parika Bell, Managing Director, Community Development Finance at MUFG Union Bank. Union Bank is proud to be title sponsor for the 2020 Unconference. We are deeply committed to supporting Housing California and its constituents as you bravely answer the call to create affordable housing and preserve sustainable communities amid unprecedented times. We have been by your side in California for over 25 years, and we will continue to be steadfast partners and advisors to you all as we collectively work toward a California that provides homes for all. Congresswoman Waters is one of the most powerful women in American politics today. She has earned a reputation of being a fearless and outspoken advocate for women, children, veterans, and the economically disenfranchised. She is a co-founder of Black Women's Forum, a nonprofit organization of over 1,200 Black women in the Los Angeles area. In the mid-1980s, she also founded Project Build, working with young people in the Los Angeles area in housing developments on job training and placement. Congresswoman Waters made history as the first woman and the first African American chair of the House Financial Services Committee. This is just a small sampling of Congresswoman Waters' many achievements. As she confronts housing and housing adjacent issues such as poverty, economic development, equal justice under the law, consumer protections, and criminal justice, Congresswoman Waters enjoys broad support from diverse communities across the nation. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
I'd like to thank Housing California's Executive Director, Lisa Hershey, for inviting me to join this call today. And I'm very appreciative of Housing California's work to combat homelessness and ensure that all Californians have a safe and affordable place to call home. During this coronavirus pandemic, which has now resulted in the deaths of more than 180,000 people across the country, including 13,000 deaths in California, we're also facing a growing eviction and homelessness crisis as millions of families struggle to make ends meet. According to the apartment list, 34% of renters were unable to pay their rent in full the first week of August, including 11% who also had not paid July rent either. Millions of families are on the verge of losing their homes. As chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, I've been sounding the alarm about this oncoming crisis with my colleagues in Congress and working around the clock to ensure that there's a strong federal response to coronavirus and its economic impacts. For months, I've been fighting for an extension of the recently lapsed federal eviction moratorium, the creation of a $100 billion emergency rental assistance fund, and other key housing relief measures during this pandemic crisis. So I'm very pleased that in California, Governor Newsom has signed an extension of our state eviction moratorium. Emergency rental assistance remains critical as back payments pile up during the pandemic. In March, I filed to get emergency rental assistance and protections included in the CARES Act. In May, I convened a roundtable on the impacts COVID-19 is having on renters and families. In June, I held a Financial Services Committee hearing on this very urgent issue. In the HEROES Act, I successfully fought for emergency rental assistance and an extension of the eviction moratorium to be included in the legislation. I also introduced the Emergency Housing Protections and Relief Act, which passed the House at the end of June to provide $100 billion to emergency rental assistance programs, $75 billion for homeowners, and extends the eviction and foreclosure moratorium that was put in place by the CARES Act through March 2021. And then in July, I held a full committee hearing to highlight the urgent need to pass the HEROES Act. It has been 110 days since the House passed the HEROES Act and 58 days since the House passed my legislation to extend the moratorium and create a $100 billion rental assistance fund and a $75 billion homeowners assistance fund. Unfortunately, the Republican-controlled Senate has completely failed to act on any action, to take any action to prevent this impending housing crisis. The so-called relief bill that Senate Republicans have put forth amounts to a slap in the face to families across the country. It does absolutely nothing to avert the impending eviction crisis, prevent homelessness, or provide urgently needed relief to renters who are struggling to make rental payments. Mitch McConnell has lived up to his self-proclaimed nickname of the Grim Reaper and left the legislation the House has passed to prevent this crisis to simply die. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has resorted to threatening criminal penalties and even imprisonment for renters who want to take advantage of a new so-called eviction moratorium ordered by the CDC that ultimately does nothing to eventually and actually prevent the growing wave of evictions across the country. We urgently need the passage of a statutory extension of the federal eviction moratorium and the creation of the Emergency Rental Assistance Fund to help struggling renters pay accumulated back rent. So, as chairwoman of the House Committee on Financial Services, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that these protections and relief are passed in law. Of course, as all of you know, America was facing an affordable housing and homelessness crisis even before this pandemic hit. According to HUD, on a given night in 2019, there were 151,278 people experiencing homelessness in California and over 567,000 people experiencing homelessness nationwide. I think that's backwards. It is 567,000, I believe, in California, and about 151,000 people. Well, that's right. Let me go back over these so we're straight. On a given night in 2019, there were 151,000 people experiencing homelessness in California, and 567,000 people, I think, maybe in LA County. That's why the very first hearing I convened as chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee was to consider the Ending Homelessness Act, a bill I introduced to provide more than $13 billion in new resources to comprehensively address the homelessness crisis. I believe that it is simply shameful that in one of the richest nations in the world, we have people living on the streets. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition in California, there is a shortage of nearly 1 million rental homes affordable and available for extremely low-income renters. This Congress, I've also introduced legislation called the Housing is Infrastructure Act, which would make much needed investments into our nation's affordable housing infrastructure to create or preserve approximately 1.8 million affordable homes. It would also help our economy recover by creating jobs and increasing affordable housing opportunities for families experiencing housing instability. The package includes $70 billion to address the capital needs backlog for almost 1 million public housing homes, $1 billion to fully address the capital needs backlog for approximately 14,000 Section 515, that is the 515 and 514 rural homes, $1 billion to support mitigation efforts that can protect communities from future disasters and reduce post-disaster federal spending, $5 billion for the Housing Trust Fund to support the creation of nearly 60,000 new units of housing that would be affordable to the lowest income households, as well as other important affordable housing investments. So I'm pleased that the Housing is Infrastructure Act was included in the Moving Forward Act, a legislative infrastructure package put together by Speaker Pelosi and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman DeFazio, which House Democrats passed through the House this summer. I'm also doing everything I can to get these critical housing measures passed into law. So I want you to know, again, that as chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, I'm fighting every single day to ensure that families get the protections and relief they need during this pandemic crisis, and that we make the investments to prevent homelessness and ensure affordable housing that is so badly needed all across the nation. So I'd like to thank again Housing California for inviting me on this call, and to thank all of you for your critical work on homelessness and housing affordability. Some of what I referenced here this morning has to do with the president's executive order. And I'm reminding you, because as this is laid out to you, it may not be clear that in the HEROES Act, I put $100 billion in there to assist renters and to assist landlords, particularly the small landlords who have 4 units, 5 units, 6 units, 8 units, etc. Now, because of the lack of the ability of the negotiators to really get the HEROES bill worked out between them and passed, we don't have the Senate support. We rolled out with $3.4 trillion for the HEROES Act. That's what's needed. Included in that was the $600 that we'd had in the CARES Act for the unemployed, those receiving unemployment benefits. And many of those benefits are very meager. And so the $600 helped to give them a bit more to be able to put food on the table. In that CARES Act, that's where the stimulus was. The stimulus plan included $1,200 for each of those 2 adults of the family and $500 for the children. So in the HEROES Act, we had much of this included again, the unemployment benefits, the stimulus, and the rental assistance in the HEROES Act, again for $100 billion. Now, this has really been undermined by the President of the United States. The President rolled out with his own executive orders. And one of those executive orders had to do with so-called getting a new moratorium on evictions. There's no money in the president's executive order. He's basically asking the landlords to be able to pay for their repairs, for utility, for all of those things that go with owning and renting units. He wants it to come out of their pockets. It's really unfair. I suppose for the renters who are so desperately, we're pleased that they're going to have a place to live, up until I think the president's executive order may go until maybe up to February. But again, without having any real resources, what he's doing is coming up with the criteria for the renters to be able to get this eviction moratorium. And it is awesome. The forms that they're asking them to fill out, that asks them all kinds of questions about whether or not this is really needed, whether or not without this moratorium, they would be homeless, or they would have to, be into someone else's home, stacking up with other relatives, etc. But the most hurtful thing about what the president is doing, he is basically making it criminal if, in fact, the answers to the forms that they're presenting to them are not completed properly or incorrectly, or if someone has lied on those forms, they are subject to criminal prosecution. I'm also worried that the renters have to show that they are paying something on their rent, that they're making every effort to pay partial rent, and that at the end of the moratorium eviction, they're going to owe a lump sum to catch up with what they haven't paid. And so all of this is basically not what I, and I think most reasonable people would expect of their government and of the President of the United States. The President of the United States has been absolutely horrible, not only on rental assistance, but other aspects of us trying to respond to this pandemic. And so for those of you who are working on behalf of renters and homeowners, I want you to know we have an uphill battle, whether we're talking about rental assistance or forbearance, which has its own problems. With that, I'm going to conclude my remarks to you and let you know that much of this is going to harm, I think, communities, families, individuals, and the only way that this can be dealt with in any reasonable way is to have the kind of administration that has an appreciation for the plight of all of these people. And that means that people are going to have to vote for those who are willing to provide government resources and to make sure that there's a safety net for the families of this country. And so that's why voting is so important. I thank you, and I will prepare for any questions that you may have. Thank you. I think we have to do it.
Thank you, Congresswoman Waters, for joining us and sharing your thought-provoking insights. You have inspired us to act boldly and unapologetically and to respond to a critical inflection point for affordable housing and for affordable housing preservation. I'd like to invite Tanua Thrash-Intuk, Executive Director for LA LISC and a Housing California Board of Director member, to take the stage for our next portion of our exciting program in our morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks so much, Parika. And it's great to start our morning with the Congresswoman sharing all that she's doing to fight on the federal level. Parika, we thank you on behalf of being a board member for Housing California for your sponsorship and partnership for this morning. I'm Tanua Thrash-Intuk, and I'm the Executive Director of LISC Los Angeles. And this morning, I am just proud of the fact that we've been able to host a fantastic conference this week. And I want to thank Lisa Hershey for her leadership in leading on this work as our executive director. Today, I have an opportunity and the honor to be able to introduce another special guest. We've got Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez here with us. She leads California's Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency. Secretary Ramirez sees housing affordability and homelessness through the lens of people living it day in and day out. As a member of the Governor's Housing and Social Services Task Force, she helped lead the response to COVID-19, including Project Room Key and Project Home Key. People experiencing homelessness are several times more likely to get sick or die as those who have homes. Project Room Key and Project Home Key think outside the box and are the kind of bold and innovative thinking we need to address those who are at most risk from contracting COVID-19, especially Black, Brown, and Native Californians. In fact, bold, innovative solutions are what we need in California today. The same old just won't do. Polls from USC, KQED, PPIC have all shown that housing affordability and homelessness are the top issues on the minds of Californians. The path forward must not be a patchwork, disorganized, but a comprehensive, coordinated, and audacious set of policies. What we don't need are incremental baby steps, but a transformational sprint. In short, we need to rip up the old tattered playbook and together write a roadmap to a California with homes, health, and prosperity for all. We're pleased to have join us today Secretary Castro Ramirez as she shares some initial remarks about her perspective on California's housing crisis. Secretary Ramirez?
Yes, good morning, Tinua. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're great.
All right, good morning, everyone. Buenos dias, and thank you so much, Tinua, for that introduction. I couldn't agree any more with your statement about we need bold transformational strategies and really a focus on ensuring that we're connecting all of the dots and ensuring that we're doing everything possible to provide a coordinated housing system. And so it is with that spirit that I join you all today, and I thank the Housing California organization led by Lisa Hershey for the invitation to be here with all of you and for the opportunity to speak at this unconference and really to spend some time answering questions that you may have about what the state is doing to support the housing system from homelessness to homeownership. I do appreciate the steadfast support and commitment that Housing California is making to ensure that everyone has an affordable, safe, and dignified place to call home. Let me begin my remarks with a story. I often think that it's important for us to be grounded in the work that we do in the space of housing with a focus on people. So I'd like to share the story of the Serna Soto family from El Centro in Imperial County. The Serna Soto family has lived in their 1960s single-wide mobile home for 15 years. This multi-generational household includes mom, dad, their daughter, son-in-law, and 4 children. In April of 2010, an earthquake damaged many homes in their mobile home park, causing destruction and distress for the Serna Soto family, and of course for many of their neighbors. And while the earthquake did not damage their home directly, they endured many challenges. When they tried to obtain insurance to protect them from natural disasters, they were told that they did not have title to their mobile home. They prayed that another natural disaster wouldn't occur because, as Maria, the mom, said, their family would lose everything. During this very difficult time, the Department of Housing and Community Development helped them obtain the title to their mobile home. They also provided assistance, and enable them to register for a program called the Fee and Tax Waiver Program under the Register Your Mobile Home initiative. HCD, through this program, has helped over 3,000 families, just like the Serna Soto family, since the program began. There are many more stories like the Serna Sotos, from individuals experiencing loss of their homes due to disasters, or working in partnership with local communities to solve homelessness and expand affordable housing opportunities, to navigating the homeownership process. The Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency supports every aspect of our housing system. Housing is key to all that we do. And through the leadership of our Governor Gavin Newsom, we are laser focused on this. Solving homelessness and increasing the availability, accessibility, and affordability of housing are our primary priorities. As you all know, even before the pandemic, families across California were struggling to afford safe, affordable housing. Too many people could not afford to live in their communities, in the communities where they worked. Too many households were cost burdened, and too many people were living in shelters or on the streets. COVID-19 and the economic crises have compounded the pre-existing housing condition and situation in California and across the country. And to add to this, recent climate events have also shown the vulnerability of our housing stock due to fires and natural disasters, adding to the additional shortage of affordable housing in our state and also causing instability for many families. I started my role in March of this year, just days before the governor declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and declared that this would be a public health crisis. And as we all know, this path has been like nothing that we've ever confronted before. The role that I have taken has been completely unexpected, and our agency really has had the opportunity not only to be reactive and to provide support, but also to rethink our approach and how we may be able to draw from these lessons of responding to a crisis to strengthen how we pivot to recovery and reimagining what our state and what our communities need from us as their state partner. So coordinating the housing system and strategically aligning our entities to better serve you and the people of California is my #1 priority. At BCSH, the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency, we have taken this opportunity to integrate our housing efforts to not just include HCD, the Housing Community Development Department, or the California Housing Finance Agency, also known as CalHFA, but equally important, we have several entities within the agency, such as the Departments of Real Estate, Fair Employment and Housing, and the Department of Business Oversight, which soon will be known as the Department of Financial Protections and Innovation, thanks to the legislature. Through the state's response to these crises, our focus has been on protecting Californians, all Californians, todos los californianos. We have worked very closely with cities and counties and community-based organizations in a coordinated and unified manner to offer relief, but also to provide funding for shelter, for services, and to keep people in their homes. Through Project Room Key, a state-led initiative in partnership with many local communities and many of you that have joined us today, we have secured hotel and motel rooms to house homeless individuals at risk of COVID-19. Over 12,000 people have been housed thanks to this initiative. But the numbers, as we all know, only provide one side of the story. Let me share the human side. The Anaheim non-congregate shelter is able now to provide housing for its citizens with the help of Project Room Key. Carl, a U.S. veteran, spent nearly a decade almost 10 years, living on and off the streets before being referred for a room to shelter in place during the COVID-19. The housing navigation team from the Anaheim non-congregate shelter was able to connect Carl to the VA and also to the local housing authority to access a HUD-VASH voucher to be able to move into permanent housing. And on September 1st, just this week, as I understand, Carl is moving into his own place, into a place that he will be able to call home. This is what our efforts are all about. People like Carl in partnerships with all of you. For the past few months, we've engaged technical experts, housing practitioners, and affordable housing stakeholders to identify short, medium, and long-term solutions to the housing and homelessness crisis that has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, with an effort focused on the 4 Ps. And I recognize that, just want to pause here, that we are showing some slides. I would ask, for the individuals that are helping with the slides, if you can just hold off on showing the slides for just a few more minutes. I'm almost there to launch the campaign here. So, just wanted to back up. So we have been, focused on developing a framework to ensure that our work is coordinated, and we've adopted a framework around what we call the 4 Ps. The protection of Californians through rental assistance to avoid foreclosure and to ensure that we're putting policies in place to keep people housed. The preservation of existing housing and strengthening the housing crisis response and rehousing system, working very closely with our Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, our also colleagues within the Department of Social Services and General Services, and many more. Thirdly, the production of homes to expand affordable housing supply. And of course, people. Developing and connecting people to jobs to reactivate a more resilient economy. Each of the 4 Ps are critically important, but people like Carl and the Serna Soto family make this real for us. Improving their quality of life is the reason we do this work. Through our departments, just in the last few months, we've been able to accomplish a lot despite this pandemic. We've distributed over $100 million in emergency COVID-19 funding to help cities and counties to provide the support and the services and the shelter and safe housing that is necessary. We also will be awarding very shortly about $600 million to city and county governments and other public agencies through the Home Key program, designed to purchase hotels and motels, also unused apartment buildings to create supportive housing for individuals experiencing homelessness. And we're continuing to add new financing tools to help meet this overwhelming demand through our partners at CalHFA. And finally, the Department of Fair Employment and Housing continues to defend California's civil rights and enforce the state fair housing laws, despite what the federal government is doing, to ensure that we are doing everything possible to integrate and eliminate those lines that divide and segregate our neighborhoods. As we look ahead to recovery efforts, housing will remain a priority for all of us. The key to successfully keeping Californians safe during this pandemic, as we all know, is ensuring that individuals have access to safe housing, housing that allows for them to be able to reach their potential, housing that allows for them to be able to be integrated into community and to be civically involved and engaged and connected to their neighbors. These are the resources that we are working towards providing, ensuring that everyone has a roof over their heads for families, communities, and for the sake of our economy. Today, I'm excited, and I think you all had a preview as I was speaking, but I would ask if we can pull up the first slide. I'm excited to preview with you all and to announce that we will be launching a comprehensive multilingual messaging campaign to call attention to the critical role of housing, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, but also building this effort beyond. This campaign is called Housing is Key. Through this initiative, let me go back. I want to make sure that I also have an opportunity to share with those of you that speak Spanish and that serve the Latino community the opportunity to also know that we've designed this campaign to be multilingual and ensure that it translates right to the communities that we serve. So the campaign is called Housing is Key, La Vivienda es Clave. Again, housing is key, la vivienda es clave. Through this initiative, we will target educational messaging and ensure that people have access to relevant resources to stay housed or to access affordable housing, starting with ensuring that Californians know the options that are available, particularly with the recent law that was signed, the bill that was passed by the legislature, the Tenant, Homeowner, Small Landlord Relief and Stabilization Act of 2020. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous leadership of the Senate and the Assembly and the tremendous leadership of the governor and his administration in making this happen. We know that it's imperfect. It does not include everything, but it does protect individuals. And in the absence of the federal government, California had to step in and do something. This is especially important in this moment, as we all know, and with the help of all of you, we hope to be able to amplify this campaign and to bring this information to the communities that you all serve. The campaign was developed with racial and geographic equity in mind, targeting communities of color that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and also that we know have been difficult to reach for many reasons. A couple of statistics that stick with me when I think about the disproportionate impact of what's happening with COVID-19 are the following. First, in our state, 39% of the population is Latino. But when you look at the COVID impact, it is well beyond the 39%. It is about 65% of the total COVID infected, or the Latinos that have been impacted by COVID-19, that have been diagnosed with COVID-19, have been about 65%. The other statistic that is really important for us to keep in mind when it comes to housing is that 3 out of every 4 renters that have been impacted by COVID-19 and have lost their job or wages are people of color, Latinos and African Americans primarily. And so it's really important that we understand how this pandemic is impacting our communities so that we may be able to come up with solutions that appropriately and responsibly assist the population that we are trying to help. The campaign messaging leads with compassion, inclusion, and clarity in navigating resources and protections. The housingiskey.com website will be launched this afternoon by Governor Gavin Newsom. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to join. Hopefully you'll have a break from the conference. Today at noon, he will have a press conference and will be announcing and showcasing the Housing is Key website. We know that people seek help from those that they trust. And we've asked many of you who are participating in this conference, along with over 500 allies, advocates, and trusted partners, to help us amplify this messaging and to share the resources with tenants, homeowners, and landlords. So as I close, it's, without a doubt, that we are living through some of the most challenging times for people all across the state, all across our country, but especially for low-income households and people of color. As I've stated before, they have been disproportionately affected by this crisis. And so a just and equitable recovery will require structural change and systematic reform and a coordinated system. The Congresswoman said that we have an uphill battle, and we do. But I also know that together, working in a coordinated and focused manner, we will be able to rise to this moment and meet this challenge. We are committed at BCSH to an all hands on deck approach with heart, con corazón, as we rise to the challenges of helping people out of homelessness through access to affordable housing and homeownership. And so I'd like to end by thanking you all for what you do every single day to ensure that families have a place to call home, to expand housing affordability opportunities, and to create strong, integrated, and vibrant neighborhoods. Thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation.
Secretary Castro Ramirez, I'll be right with you. I'm waiting for them to start my video.
Okay.
Great. Secretary Castro Ramirez, thank you so much for all of your words. As I was listening to you, I was like, yes, we are thinking, forward. We are thinking creatively. And the stories that you tell, the fact that you are someone who is at the forefront of policy and is putting first and foremost the issue of families and their stories, con corazón. I love that, with heart, and we hear it. We hear it from you. So I've got a couple questions for you this morning, some from our audience and some from our notes as well. It's so exciting. The Housing is Key campaign. We're hearing it here first, right? Just before the governor has had a chance to really make this exciting announcement. That's great that our Housing California friends out there are able to do that. Is there anything else that you want to share in terms of details about resources that will be available for tenants and landlords and homeowners? And how is the agency, going to make sure that people understand how to navigate all of these resources through this program?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We are very excited that we are able to launch this campaign. And I'll just share that, this campaign with a focus on education, outreach, and awareness was really born out of the work with housing advisors that we call our, basically our housing kitchen cabinet. In responding to COVID-19, we know that, because we're living through very difficult times and, the challenges are tremendous, we cannot solve these issues on our own. And so early on in the process, we established a group of trusted partners to help inform the strategies around homelessness and affordable housing. And that group became known as the Housing Advance Working Group. And one of the gaps that we identified with their help was that we needed to do more in terms of having a comprehensive communication and messaging campaign, not for the sake of us who are in the space, but really for the sake of the individuals that we serve. And so we began developing and working this messaging and communications campaign. And with the looming eviction crisis, and with the grave concern that many families will be losing their housing, we accelerated our efforts and really have designed the Housing is Key with a focus on providing information on tenant rights and tenant protections afforded through the act that the governor signed just on Monday. We also will be providing resources and information to landlords on the obligations that they have in working with their tenants to keep them housed. And also are developing a series of other resources that many of you have either made available or resources that you all have found to be helpful to families that are at risk for losing their homes because of an eviction. As I mentioned also, the Housing is Key will be web-based. It will be housed in the Department of Real Estate under the landlord and tenant portal. More of this information will be available this afternoon, and so I invite you all to stay tuned for that. We also are planning to have a stakeholder call this evening, and many of you that are on the call will probably be receiving an invitation where we will be able to preview the Housing is Key website, the resources, but equally important, we want to spend time going through the protections that are codified in the AB 3088, the bill that the governor signed on Monday. We think it's really important to spend the time understanding how are renters protected, what are the steps that are necessary both on the renter side and on the landlord side, what protections are available for homeowners, and how can we work together to continue also elevating the importance of additional federal resources necessary to address this issue.
Great. Well, we've got a number of questions about the program and also some of the other work we've been doing with Project Room Key. So let's get to a couple of those because the audience seems to be eager to hear about some of that. I think we'll take this question. So right now we're housing a lot of very vulnerable individuals and families through the Project Room Key and Project Home Key. And this has resulted in a significant number of people who are new to housing, but they need ongoing and intensive case management, especially those who have other issues such as substance abuse and mental health issues. But current funding does not support this at the level that is really needed. These folks, we're afraid, might fall back into homelessness if we don't supply them with the critical support they need. So what funding is planned to support the crucial housing retention, long-term services support that many of our families and friends need?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when we speak about housing, particularly housing for individuals that have been without, a stable housing environment for a long time, or struggling with, a number of other mental health or physical health issues, it is really important for us to couple the housing with, services. So I recognize the importance of also ensuring that there's funding available to make that happen. In the budget that was adopted by the governor this year, under the Home Key initiative, there was $50 million set aside that would specifically enable us to provide that level of, or that flexibility to provide support for services. In addition to that, within our Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, the legislature and the governor, through the adoption of the budget, has allocated $300 million to the continuums of care and local governments to continue to provide the services necessary to support individuals experiencing homelessness. In addition to that, we have been working through HCD on the allocation and distribution of ESG dollars. And I think that it's very important that we continue to work with local government, particularly counties that have the ability to be able to strengthen sort of that, services connection to the housing providers. I'll share with you that, my housing and community development work was basically initiated here in the state of California. My first job right after college was working for a community development corporation, nonprofit in Ventura County called Cabrillo Economic Development. And then from there, I spent 10 years working for the LA City Housing Authority. And I was so honored to work with the administration of Villa Regosa and a number of other local leaders in developing the first coordinated permanent supportive housing program in the city of LA, bringing together the housing department, the housing authority, and towards towards the end, as I was transitioning to San Antonio, the county, recognizing the importance of services. And so I think these are also the types of partnerships that are necessary. Coordinating the housing system at the state level for me and for the governor is a priority, but the same level of coordination needs to happen at the local level. And so we will continue to do that at the state level and work in partnership with local entities to see how we may be able to facilitate, provide technical assistance, or support those efforts.
Mm-hmm. Well, Secretary, there's been a lot of questions about that and a lot of interest in making sure that there are those supportive services. Let's talk a little bit about folks who are very concerned about some of the most vulnerable in our state. So this, I'm going to give you a couple of sets of questions. Like we're going to talk about one set of folks and another set of folks, another set of folks. So let's see how we get through that. Mm-hmm. So essentially, low-income households and people of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And you've mentioned that even in your remarks. And so what approaches are you taking to make sure that we're advancing racial equity and economic justice? And then I want to follow up and I want to talk about the differently abled community, and I want to follow up and talk about students as well. So let's start with advancing racial and economic justice.
Yes. I think that, particularly when it comes to housing, we all know that there's a history there of redlining and segregation, right, that still permeates to today, that, is the reason for some of the housing patterns or some of the, lack of access to housing that we see. I spent 11 years in San Antonio, and, San Antonio, despite how wonderful and beautiful a city it is one of the most segregated cities across the country, segregated by race, but also segregated by economics. And that, was by design. And so I think the first step is recognizing that these historical structural patterns of racism exist in our housing system. Once we recognize and accept that, then I think the next step is to ensure that we are advancing policies and laws and programs to undo those, structural forces. One, important tool that we have is the affirmatively furthering fair housing, and ensuring that we're using that lens as we determine where housing investments will go. I'm a firm believer that we need to create affordable housing opportunities in what we call, quote unquote, neighborhoods of opportunity, where there are better schools, jobs, and other amenities. But I'm also a firm believer, just given my sort of experience working in public housing, that we cannot ignore poor neighborhoods. We need to also invest in poor neighborhoods and come in with strategies that are respectful and dignified for the people that we're serving there. So when I think about, equity and the work that we're doing at the state level, recognizing the history and recognizing what is necessary in neighborhoods is critically important. What we have done within agency, again, through this process of developing the 4Ps, the framework for organizing our work. We've adopted an equity and inclusion lens and also an equity and inclusion toolkit or tool to help assess and really sort of to push our decision making when we are developing programs and or managing, existing funding. I, would love to follow up and share that equity and inclusion tool with all of you, because I think that it is, important for us to also build a community of practice where information can be shared. The other thing that, that is really important, and it goes back, Tunua, to your question about low-income households. I think it's important when we use the verbiage affordable housing that we challenge ourselves to start, kind of taking a deeper dive in terms of what does that mean? What is affordable housing? Who are we speaking about? And where is the greatest need? And, our housing needs assessment, that the last one that was conducted by HCD, demonstrates and shows that the biggest need for housing is for individuals that are very low or extremely low income. That's, individuals that make less than 50% of AMI. In fact, I think the numbers show that we have about 2.5 million households that need affordable housing at that level. And so equity, I think, is also, about recognizing that the resources that were entrusted to manage and to administer and to allocate, that those resources are targeted towards where there's the greatest need. And so we're working internally to coordinate our housing strategies, but also to develop an approach that will better align to the state's tax credit allocation system. And I think that when we talk about sort of systems and structures, I think that's the level of work that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. So, and I know Secretary Castro Ramirez, when you also think about inclusion, I'm imagining for households that might be low income, that are also households of those who have disabilities or different abilities. There have been some questions regarding students, especially college students of color, who are having a hard time making the connection with going to school and trying to house themselves, given market costs. So you might can just say a few words about that, and then I'd like to go on to another couple of questions.
Yeah, I would say that it's important that we understand again the diversity of need across need and opportunity across the state, and so from housing type to family composition, right? So as we look at the various programs primarily that are administered through HCD, I think we're paying attention to how these programs are helping to advance housing that is fair and accessible to all populations. And so, yes, I think that's very much aligned, to the work that we're doing across the board. I will, say that one of the priorities that HCD has currently is to look at across all programs that they are responsible for administering, and the dollars that go out to communities, and looking at ways to be more targeted and to be more streamlined. And as we do that, I think it's important that we not lose sight, though, of the importance of making sure that in some cases we do need to have targeted programs for populations that are underserved or underrepresented.
Yeah. So we've got a specific question about the housing eviction moratorium bill. So this is AB 3088. So the governor signed The governor, will the governor signing this be impacted by the CDC order? Does it only impact how much renters will owe landlords? And I'm not sure if you have all the details about this particular piece of legislation, Secretary Ramirez. I just wanted to check to see.
Yes, we are still analyzing and reviewing the CDC eviction moratorium that was announced yesterday. But I will say that our preliminary analysis shows that the bill, AB 3088, which protects tenants, landlords, and homeowners, is this CDC order will have no impact. In fact, it's not as strong as the bill that was signed by the governor and passed by the legislature. We hope to be able to complete our analysis today and confirm and verify that. With regard to the Tenant, Homeowner, and Small Landlord Relief and Stabilization Act, very long act, but with substantive protections, we have issued guidance that speaks to the protections and the relief and the steps that are necessary, to ensure that tenants and landlords are, particularly tenants, are able to stay housed. I would invite the participants of the conference to visit our covid19.ca.gov website. It is, basically the place where all things COVID are made available, including there is a section on housing, and the guidance is available on the website. The guidance is also available, of course, on our website. But essentially, as I understand it, we're still, of course, making sure that there's clarity in how this gets communicated to tenants. Tenants that are that basically have been unable to pay their rent, either whole or partial, that were impacted by COVID-19 from March 1st through 2020 through August 31st, 2020, are basically protected and cannot be evicted if they are able to return a declaration of a COVID-19 related financial distress to their landlords. But they must do so within 15 business days of receiving a pay or quit notice from their landlord. So of course, getting that information out and making sure that landlords and tenants have access to those forms is important. And so there's a few other steps. I won't go into it now, but let me speak to the next group or the next set of protections. And that's for tenants that are unable to pay all or some of their rent between September 1st, yesterday, which was the day that the Judicial Council's order was lifted, through January 31st of 2021. Basically, the same rights and responsibilities apply as as I mentioned previously. But in addition to that, tenants must pay at least 25% of the rent that is due during the period of September 1st, 2020 through January 31st, 2021 to avoid an unlawful detainer or eviction action filed against them. And again, there are steps that need to be taken and forms and documentation that needs to be put in place.
Sure.
Yes.
So yeah, great, Secretary Castro Ramirez. I mean, we've gone through and in our conversation so far, you've laid out the story and the case for what's happening to families in our state. Most people who are on this call know and already are well aware of the housing crisis and know how many units that we so desperately need. We're excited about what's happening with the project Home Key. And so let me just ask just a couple more questions and I'm going to wrap up. And I want to thank our audience for sending a number of questions in. So now let's talk about, production and what's happening at the statewide level in terms of trying to increase the kind of density that we might need in certain areas. So here's the question. So some would say that Proposition 13 contributes to an othering, a separating of homeowners from renters. And wondering if you've got, any thoughts about how the state or how we as advocates can be answering the question that we're hearing from homeowners associations across the state. No more density. No more density because it causes COVID. No more density because it causes crime. No more density because we don't want that in our neighborhoods. Yet in the face of all of these other areas that we've just talked about in terms of the need for housing units and for the need for very low income and highly affordable units as well.
Yeah, production is very key to the overall housing system. There is, definitely an undersupply of housing, particularly an undersupply of affordable housing. And so I think we need to really do all that we can through policy, through funding, through law, to increase, production of all types of housing. But I think it's important, of course, that when we look at issues of density, I do believe that, it's important that we not lose sight of when we talk about density. I think we're largely talking about building housing that is close to jobs, that is integrated into a neighborhood, that is integrated into the fabric of the local economy. So it's not density per se just to build. It is, housing, being strategic and thoughtful about where we're locating housing so that families have less of a commute, have the ability to access, schools or jobs. And so I think maybe we just need to reframe the conversation and make sure that we don't lose sight of the thoughtfulness that is going into location and not, speak about density in the absence of how housing is connected to the infrastructure, and also how important it is, in terms of advancing our climate goals. As the secretary of the agency, I also represent the agency and serve on the Strategic Growth Council. And, the Strategic Growth Council is very focused on supporting local government and local initiatives in being more strategic in terms of how they're investing in housing, transportation, the economy, with a focus on reducing our carbon footprint, increasing air quality, really, addressing our climate, goals. So I would say we have to be broader when we talk about house density, and I think that's what we are doing.
Well, I love that you were reminding us of the intersections of what we're trying to accomplish here, and the connection first and foremost to putting housing near jobs and opportunity. And then we've got some other goals, as a region, as a state, as a country, in terms of also solving issues of environmental justice and climate change. And some of those issues require that we rethink about our settlement patterns. So thanks for reminding us of that. I will note that somebody did lob off in the chat box in the Q&A. They want to know, is the state of California going to get into the business of building housing itself and not wait on the private sector to get it done? We'll leave that for another day, but I thought it was a great question. What did you say?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I know our governor is going to be there this afternoon, and so I'm sure that he'll have an opportunity to share his vision and the many accomplishments, despite, of course, everything that we're dealing with that he's leading. And we as members of his administration are doing our best to implement and execute.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job. I mean, Secretary, coming on today and, sharing the stories that you did, sharing, your passion for the work and it coming out in the sincerity of your remarks, as well as the details and being able to get in the weeds. I mean, we've got a lot of housing folks on here who've been doing this for many decades and who are very interested in some of the details and intricacies of policy. And I'm very impressed and very thankful and glad that we've got someone like you sitting in that seat in leadership and being able to get right in there with the field in trying to make a difference. So on behalf of the Housing California board, staff, and all of the members who attended today, Secretary Castro Ramirez, we want to thank you for all your remarks for today. So what I'll do is I'll close out this morning's session. So just before you go, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a few things that are happening right now. Unfortunately, we know that too many Californians, countless, are hurting, especially Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. And while this pandemic has killed more than 12,000 Californians and countless others who are also managing through our state's ravaging fires, too many people have been displaced from their homes. Low-income renters, as we've talked about, are having a hard time being able to make their rent because they've lost their jobs. They've had hours reduction or furloughed or no work at all, and they're facing an eviction cliff as rent becomes due. Unemployment insurance has run out, and the Judicial Council's eviction moratorium expires. We've gone through all of this today and talked about how critical it is that California leadership is there and has been able to step up. And we thank Secretary Castro Ramirez for sharing with us just exactly what the governor's doing in the face of this. Our hearts go out to all of those who are suffering today. You heard the passion in Secretary Castro Ramirez's voice. You all know, for those of you who know me, how passionate I am about those issues. But our thoughts are just not enough. And that's why Housing California and all of us are doing more than ever right now. So during our unconference this week and beyond, let's make sure we're on a path towards advancing racial justice, shaping a new narrative for housing and homelessness, and shifting and building power with and for those who are most impacted by these challenges. And we've got to advance true structural systematic change to reform policies that will create more homes for all Californians so that we have homes, health, and prosperity for all. So we look forward to moving through this day, the rest of the unconference experience with you. I have 3 final thoughts to share. First, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the staff, the board of directors of Housing California for making this unconference happen. There's so many folks behind the scenes, and we are very grateful for all of your hard work. An additional shout out today to California Housing Consortium, who is a co-host of today's sessions as we focus on changing policy. CHC is a critical partner of ours, co-leading legislative and budgetary advocacy in Sacramento to advance affordable housing development. Second, here are a few tips and tricks to ensure that you have the best possible unconference experience today. During the sessions, feel free to chat with one another in the chat box. If you haven't seen people, we wished you had a chance to see them in person, drop them a line in the chat box and make sure you're being interactive. Ask those questions. Make sure you put questions in the Q&A box for our speaker. You can also check out our user guide. It's your best friend to get to know what's happening at the Housing California Conference. If you are still having questions, you can email us at info@housingca.org. And finally, make sure you visit our exhibit hall following the session where you can win prizes. Make sure when you tweet, you use the hashtag HousingCA2020 on Twitter and Facebook to help those who haven't been able to be part of this conversation to amplify what it is that we're talking about. You'll see the Housing California team live streaming as well, all of our sessions as we go. We ask you to join along, retweet, like those things, and make sure you're engaging in the conversation as well. So on behalf of our staff and board, I'm Tanua Thrash-Intook, and it's been a pleasure being with you this morning. Enjoy the rest of the unconference.